Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have one of my favorite people and friends, Mr. Robert Cheeke. Robert is a prolific author of really 5 books at this point, which is amazing to say. Vegan Bodybuilding and Fitness, Plant-Based Muscle, and the bestseller, of course, Plant-Based Athlete, and one coming out, The Impactful Vegan, coming out within the next year, which I understand. He is also mentioned typically as the godfather of vegan bodybuilding, and even in Veg News, they've listed him as one of the most influential vegan athletes. So welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Dr. Sabatino, thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you. I feel like I just saw you.
I know, because we see each other at that vegan bodybuilding thing with Jeff Palmer and all that. That was lovely too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great event. And that's a lot of, we'll talk about some of that today. But before we do, a lot of people find they segue into this way of thinking and living in a lot of different ways. And I know you were brought up on a farm in Corvallis, Oregon, and I know that you turned into a vegan lifestyle at a very young age, really, as a teenager at the age of 15. So can you share a little bit of that early journey? What were the aha moments? What were the things that inspired that very early transition for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting that I ended up here, given my farming background and my parents coming from farming backgrounds and actually meeting in the animal science department at Oregon State University, and my father being an animal science professor for 30 years and authoring 10 to 15 books on the subject, teaching college students how to raise animals for food. I mean, my father he even won an award. I think they called it an Oscar, a rabbit Oscar for rabbit research in 1988 as the top rabbit researcher in the world, I believe. And he wrote multiple books on that subject. I mean, this is the world that I come from. I lived right next to a dairy farm. I mean, just bordering our property was a dairy farm. We were a small family farm, lots of animals, horses, ponies, cows, goats, turkeys, geese, ducks, chickens, rabbits, guinea pigs, gerbils. I'm sure others in there as well. And, I raised these animals. I showed them at the county fair. I raised chickens. I sold them for money. I raised dairy calves, bottle fed them before getting on the school bus, came home and interacted with them and sold them at the auction for money. And eventually that caught up with me. This is before the internet. This is in the mid 1990s. December 8th, 1995, my older sister, who had already become vegan for the same reasons that I would later, she took issue with raising these animals on a farm, giving them names, having them as pets, welcoming them as part of the family, and then selling them to be turned into someone's meal. She took issue with that. I didn't at the time. She became vegan before I did. She's 2 years older. And then she organized this animal rights week at our high school. And I thought, you know what, out of respect for my older sister, I'll show up. It's speakers, much like we have on the circuit these days, talking about issues involving animal suffering, videos of factory farming and animal testing, literature, conversations. And I decided I would do it for a week, and I haven't done the math, or at least not lately. But I think last I checked, it's something like 1,400 weeks now, almost 28 years later. And even 2 years later, when I was a senior in high school, I was organizing the Animal Rights Week for the school and getting my high school to order synthetic leather basketballs, synthetic leather footballs, non-leather materials for the school, starting recycling programs, again, mid-1990s, a progressive thing in an agriculture community known for its animal science and animal agriculture. And that's where it started for me, Dr. Sabatino. But there's also something I haven't mentioned yet. When I was in 8th grade, just 2 years prior to becoming vegan, I weighed 89.25 pounds. I barely weighed 100 pounds when I entered high school. You should see my photos on the basketball team. I had this wristwatch that seemed like the size of my head. I was a small guy. And I weighed 120 pounds when I became vegan as a sophomore in December of 95. And I grew up watching He-Man and Captain Planet and pro wrestling and having aspirations of getting bigger and stronger, and thought maybe it wasn't in the cards for me when I adopted a plant-based diet and vegan lifestyle. You know the rest of the story. I put on.
Well, how much did it freak out? I mean, how much did it send your father over the cliff saying, what happened to my children, when he watched you and your sister moving in this direction of animal rights and away from everything that he was basically teaching and believing? What was that like in the household when those transitions were happening?
Yeah, there was actually a really funny quote. So I didn't give the full background. My older sister became vegan before me.
Right.
The day that I became vegan, my youngest brother at age 11 decided to become a vegetarian because he did basically whatever I did. And then my younger brother, just 2 years younger than me, was a farmer. I mean, full on pickup truck, gun rack, bumper stickers, rodeo, selling steers and other animals at the auction. He worked at the auction yard. And so there was a comment. You asked what my father said. He kind of joked that only one of his kids turned out right, was the son that pursued farming. And I'm telling you, during holidays, I mean, I don't want to say you can't imagine, because you probably can. We've got my sister, myself, my younger brother as vegans and vegetarian. Both my parents, enthusiastic consumers of animals. My brother, a big farmer, rodeo kind of guy. So my brother had this pickup truck, right? Parked by the house with a bumper sticker, "Enjoy a juicy steak tonight." Right next to that was parked my sister's, 19, whatever it was, 70 something Volkswagen bus with a sticker, I believe from Farm Sanctuary back in the 80s, that said, "If you love animals called pets, why do you eat animals called dinner?" Side by side, this is how conversations went. This is how holidays went. I even boycotted Thanksgiving one year. I just couldn't spend it with my family. There was tension, there was turmoil.
Well, it's interesting because you guys were all basically teenagers, so you were still living in a house, and I'm assuming your mother was preparing food and all of that. So how did the food prep thing come together with these dichotomies that were going on in the household?
Yeah, looking back, man, I my poor parents, that's kind of part of how I think now. I mean, the kind of things they had to deal with the juxtapositions of, in their mind, they're doing the right thing. I mean, they grew up in small farming communities, with my mom in a town with one school, 5 students in her class, a town of 300 or something. My father in a town, not much bigger, fewer than 1,000 people, in British Columbia, Canada, a little bit north of Victoria. And they were proudly in 4-H. My mom was the co-president of the 4-H club that we were part of. And so for them, I think they were actually sad to see us going in this direction. And, we're lucky, Dr. Sabatino, we had a giant garden outside. We had a small 20-acre farm. You can get a lot on that.
Well, there's a lot out of 20 acres. You can get a lot out of 20 acres.
Oh yeah. We cultivate thousands of pounds of walnuts. We still sell them to this day. Wow. Commercially, I go back and harvest every fall. I'll be going back again in October. That's what I do every year. Hazelnuts. But I would actually go out. I'm telling you, Frank, I would go out there and pick my meals. I would pick apples. We had apples of lots of varieties. We had plums. We had even, I guess, kind of exotic type. We had quince. We had Asian pears. We even had gooseberries. We had blackberries. We had blueberries, strawberries. And then we had a garden full of zucchini, tomatoes, green beans, peas, corn, all that. We would go out there and actually harvest cucumbers, and my mom would put salt on them and eat them, and tomatoes, same thing. And so, you know what? They were accommodating. We would make pasta. Even though it was the 90s, there were still some veggie burgers,
right.
Eve's Veggie Cuisine and Boca. Some brands were ahead of their time. There were some vegan foods that way, beyond just the traditional plant-based whole foods, which wasn't on a lot of people's radar back then, as far as a viable diet that would prevent and reverse many diseases and be, arguably the healthiest diet that one could follow. We didn't know that back then. And so my parents were accommodating. My mom, you're right. My dad traveled a lot as a PhD expert in animal science. He toured 6 continents. I grew up with all these T-shirts from China, Thailand, South Africa. It was pretty cool. Waiting for gifts. I later, when I became an adult, realized he got them from the airport because I do the same now for my nieces and nephews. But they were accommodating. My mom got foods from the garden. She made things like pasta and, of course, rice and beans and potatoes we grew on the farm, and sweet potatoes and zucchini and corn and all that. And it worked. And I was outspoken in school. I got kicked out of class sometimes for arguing for animal rights, in a classroom where everybody was against me. And I challenged people's beliefs and perspectives, maybe not in the most, cognizant or appropriate way, as a passion infused animal rights advocate as a teenager. And no wonder I got kicked out of class for arguing, like they're suffering because of you. It may be true, but you don't need to yell at your fellow 17-year-old classmates and the teacher and blame all the problems on them, rather than a systemic societal problem that has deep roots within industrial revolution and post-World War and feeding ourselves what we thought was the most nutrient dense and healthiest food, which is animal protein, and the marketing juggernaut that supported that.
So what happened to your brother with the gun rack? Where is he at now? He runs a multi-million-dollar farming operation. Oh, that's interesting.
And even his slogan, he's got these like probably 18 wheelers, and all these trucks and trailers and combines and stuff. And one of his slogans with all these big 18 wheelers is either hauling ass or hauling grass. So he's in the grass seed capital of the world, but he also hauls ass. He hauls animals. He hauls Christmas trees down to California every year. But I'm telling you, I was on the phone yesterday with my mother. The day before yesterday. Okay. They just finished the county fair. My brother's oldest son was just old enough to raise a steer and sell at the auction. My mom said, how much do you think Tyler got for his steer? I said, I don't know. She goes, throw out a number. I said, $800? She said $15,000.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a lot different than when I was in 4-H. Make it under $1,000 for a large animal and like $40 for 4 chickens. Yeah, and she said the farm actually, which is a major food producing farm, Stallbush Islands, they're national. You'd see them in every store, including in Florida. You'd see their frozen fruit and vegetables. I guess they spent $15,000 on many steers. It's to support the community and the kids. You obviously get way more than market value. It's these young 4-H kids raising their animals, and that's what I've taken issue with over the years. You build up this trust with this individual. They're like big puppies, these baby calves, right? They follow you around. You bottle feed them. They lick on your fingers, and they follow you around, waiting to get this milk formula, and you work with them, get them ready for 4-H and all this stuff. And then you say, hey, my friend, go into that octagon or that circular ring. We're going to bid on you, and we're going to send you away. You're not coming home. You're someone's meal now. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the money. I'm going to go do whatever I want with it now.
Right.
And I don't believe these are bad people. I don't believe my brother's a bad person or that my nephew's a bad person. It just creates, especially as you mentioned, my new book, The Impactful Vegan, as I get back to my roots after writing 5 books on plant-based health and fitness. I'm going back to my roots and the animal rights that inspired me down this path that changed my life forever and hopefully changed many other lives forever. It creates that friction within my heart. I love my brother. I love my parents. I'm fortunate. My parents are both still around. I love my nieces and nephews. But I struggle with some of their decisions. It's that whole saying, I don't hate you. I hate what you do.
Right.
And I hate what you do from a place of objective observation as someone who did eat animals for 15 years. I raised animals for a long time. I sold them. Now I've been on the other side of things for 28 years. And I just, it's a hard position emotionally to be in, but I always just look for the positives. Like my brother, 75% of what he manages now on 1,000 or more acres is plant-based crops.
Okay. Well, that's a big shift. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I look at that, and I look at the fact that my brother and his two sons, and they do love animals, and maybe someday they'll have more of a sanctuary style relationship, or like my mom has. My mom has 50 chickens. She sells eggs to neighbors and friends and all that, but the chickens live their entire lives, for the duration of their lives on the farm. They run freely. They just go into a little house at nighttime where they can be protected from possums and skunks and coyotes and all of that. But they're out, every waking hour, roaming freely, and they live out their entire lives there. I would love to see that with my brother's cattle operation someday, if you were able to make a viable living through grass seed, through oats, through barley, alfalfa, through Christmas trees and other operations. And that's what I'm holding out hope for.
Well, I'm here with Robert Cheeke. We're going to take a few moments to hear from our sponsor, but don't go away. We want to hear about how Robert evolved from the 100-pound weakling that he was as a teenager to the godfather of vegan bodybuilding. So we'll be right back. You're listening to the Health Science Podcast Show. I want to remind you to visit the National Health Association website, where you'll find incredible resources to support your healthy lifestyle, including plant-exclusive eating without added salt, oil, and sugar. Simply go to healthscience.org or nationalhealthassociation.org. Be sure to check out membership, which is only $35 per year for those living within the United States and $55 for those living outside the U.S. You'll be amazed at all the information and benefits you'll receive. As a member, you're kept up to date on the latest evidence-based tools for health promotion. You'll receive the incomparable quarterly magazine, Health Science, a beautiful 40-page advertising-free publication mailed to your home or offices, loaded with articles, recipes, inspirational stories, and interviews with world leaders in the fields of personal health, plant-based nutrition, water-only fasting, animal rights, and environmental support. And you'll receive details about life-changing events, such as the extraordinary annual conference of the National Health Association and diverse opportunities for plant-exclusive NHA cruises and travel vacations to exotic destinations around the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and now back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm here with Robert Cheeke, who is one of the game changers in the entire history of vegan bodybuilding. Robert, we talked about, we'll come back to that issue that we were discussing on animals and impact, but I want to get this mentality of how you had that desire to become one of the strong men that you kind of wanted to emulate, that you kind of idolize in the wrestling world and all of that. So talk about how you started that dance, going from that very thin teenager into wanting to put on that mass and become the strong man that in many ways you have become. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I think it stems from a desire to be something that I never was. So I was a small kid. I got pushed around. I got picked on a little bit. I even hung out with the wrong crowd for a while because I felt like they could protect me. If somebody wanted to beat me up or fight me or whatever, I would have protection from, some people from the wrong crowd. In fact, not making a judgment here, of course, but just an observation that I found a childhood photo from a birthday party, 5th grade, I think. And there's 8 of us in the photo. And to the best of my knowledge, only 2 of us graduated from high school in that photo. And, some of my childhood friends spent a few years in prison. I learned that from Facebook and things of that nature. So, I was a small guy, but I was a really fast runner. I ran on the #2 ranked cross country team in high school. I played on the #1 ranked soccer team in the state of Oregon. I ran cross country at Oregon State University. And what I tell people is I checked in right here, right in my heart, and said, you know what, man, I want to be this strong muscle guy. At least give myself a chance. At least give it a try. And my sincere thought, this is 100% honest. I don't care what anyone says or thinks. My sincere thought was that if I can do this, I'd already been vegan for 2-3 years now. If I can do this, lifting weights without consuming any animal protein or even any animal byproducts, and I truly can get bigger and stronger, this can show other people that they can do it too. And collectively, we could reduce animal suffering. That was my goal. That was my intention. One of the reasons why I succeeded, if you want to say that term, was because I had this deep meaning behind it. Like a Jeff Palmer type. I had this drive. I had this external force. I had this compelling reason that got me out of bed every day to work hard. I connected the dots years in advance. How did I do it, Dr. Sabatino? How did I do it? I did it by connecting the dots. I was a skinny little guy lifting little weights, looking in the mirror at the gym. Probably people laughing at me, people saying he's never going to amount to anything. And I'm sure some people did say that to me. But I said, yeah, not a year from now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now. Give me time, allow me to grow, allow me to adapt, allow me to discover something about myself. And so I did. I embraced lifting weights, and I got into the Bill Phillips Body for Life program. You might recognize it from being perhaps the greatest body transformation program in the history of at least American culture, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, major New York Times bestseller. Bill Phillips changed the lives of millions of people, myself included. I did this program with optimism. I followed this program. Of course, I did a vegan version of it. He was also trying to sell his whey protein supplements and recommending chicken and salmon every day. I just understood that he was recommending protein and amino acids and calories, and I made it work with a plant-based diet. And I put on 19 pounds in 12 weeks. And I thought, well, why not? Let's keep going. I put on 28 pounds over a 10-month period. I went from just a regular kind of endurance athlete to on the verge of being a bodybuilder. I put on another 10 pounds the next year. And all of a sudden, I purchased my first pair of posing trunks and entered in my first bodybuilding competition. That was 2001. It was a long time ago. Oh, man, over 20 years ago now. And I continued on that journey. And next thing you knew, I competed in bodybuilding. By the time I got into my second ever competition, I won first place. And I would win first place again. I would be runner-up 4 times. I would compete for a decade and write for many magazines around the world. I ended up on at least 4 magazine covers, on the inside covers of many others. I produced a documentary way back in 2005, the same year YouTube was invented or was released, and sold DVDs of this Vegan Fitness Built Naturally documentary that I wrote, directed, and produced. And I went from 120 pounds to 220 pounds at my peak, which was only 10 pounds ago. I'm 210 pounds today. And I was able to do it.
What's phenomenal about that, though, because I want to highlight this, is that when you were first doing that, as much as you had this mentored program that was still really grounded in animal protein and all that, you were really flying by the seat of your pants.
Of course.
And you kind of pioneered a mentality, because even to this day, as you well know, in the bodybuilding field, there's still this stigma that, animal protein is the only way you can go. Back in the 90s, forget about it. It was really so etched with this idea that, how are you going to do this? So I give you a lot of credit in that. I'm sure there were times when you really weren't quite sure what the direction, where it was going to go, but you stuck to your purpose and your plan, and it really moved you in the direction that you went to. But it was really flying by the seat of your pants back then. And that's pretty amazing when you really think about it. And
absolutely. I read muscle magazines. They were all pointing me in the direction of whey protein, of course, animal protein. And I wouldn't do it. I read right through it. I said, no, there's got to be another way. And some of my practices back then were probably not the best. I mean, I ate 7 Cliff Bars a day sometimes. Is that a healthy approach? No, but that was the 90s. That was what I knew. I ate during a period of time, hundreds of grams of protein a day, mostly isolated soy protein, not organic tofu, not, it was isolated like tofu hot dogs and tofu
Right.
bologna.
Well, you were looking for that calorie density, which of course is a big issue when you're
Exactly.
training and you're working out. So you did what you had to do. Well, did you have to resort, or did you resort to the use of protein powders that were non-animal based back then, or do you still
No,
advocate some of that now in training, or are
no,
you someone who separated from all of that?
well, I've never had an animal-based supplement in my
No, I
entire
don't mean
life.
that, but even vegan-based protein powders, did you ever resort to those, or do you
Oh, I
use
did.
those,
Yes.
or have you used those in the past?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
But just to be clear, I never had whey protein or casein
Yeah, no, I
protein.
understand. I know that. I know that.
I never did because by the time I got into lifting weights, I'd already been vegan for 5 years. But yes, I did use soy protein, rice protein, eventually pea protein. And I did this for a while. And it had, a number of observational implications. I was up to sometimes 5 protein drinks a day, very bloated, gassy. I was living with some roommates. There were 4 or 5 of us in the house. We called it the Vegan House of Kindness is what it was called. This is early 2000s. My friend and I named it that way. It was a bunch of vegan friends, all focused on compassion, kindness. That was our MO. But one time I got a group email from the other roommates about some sort of like sewer issue in the house. Like, what the hell, what is going on? And I said, actually, you know what? That's my bad. I'm preparing for bodybuilding competition. That is just gas from me from consuming, 5 protein drinks a day. I was that bloated, that gassy, that I was creating so much gas in the house that they thought it was like a sewer problem. And it's comical to look back on now, but I used a lot of plant-based sports supplements, whatever I could get my hands on. And partly, I actually worked for a company for 10 years. So I had free access to protein and pre-workout and post-workout and branched chain amino acids and all that. And then it all stopped. As you may know, I got a job working for Forks Over Knives. Brian Wendell called me up. I was kind of nomadic, bouncing around the country, if I'd come down and help release this film, Forks Over Knives. I'd already seen an early preview, including some scenes that never made it to the final cut. And I said, sure, I'll move to LA and Santa Monica and I'll do this thing. And so here I was working in the office of the film that put plant-based whole food nutrition on the map, essentially on a large scale. And I was drinking protein drinks and pre-workout drinks, and they would kind of tease me. They'd be like, Robert's got to take a pre-workout drink to tie his shoes, and he's got to take a protein drink to walk across the room. And it was this like, semi-playful teasing of like, man, what are you doing? You're working for Forks Over Knives. You've seen the film many times. You know the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet, yet you're drinking all these powders and everything. And at that point, partly I was doing it for budget reasons too. I didn't have any money, could barely afford to live in LA. In fact, I got run out of town after my job ended with Forks Over Knives. I couldn't even afford to stay in Los Angeles. And I literally got in my car and just drove and slept in my car in states all over the country and stayed at people's houses until I could, find my footing again. And it was during that time that I started questioning my use of sports supplements. I was in a very fortunate position. I mean, how many people in their life, throughout any point of their life, get to go on tour with Dr. T. Colin Campbell and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and do film screenings around North America, from the Capitol in Washington, D.C. to up in Canada to other places. And I think, honestly, Dr. Sabatino, I felt like a little bit of a hypocrite, maybe. At least I like to think that I'm very self-aware. Like, I know my shortcomings. I know my weaknesses. I know my strengths. I know some of the things that have made me unsuccessful, and I know the things that have made me successful, including this vision of connecting the dots in advance, where I just know I'm going to get bigger and stronger, or I know I'm going to be able to release a major New York Times bestseller. I predicted that decades ago when I was a child. Like, I just know this stuff. I just need the time, and I need the plan, and I need the dots to be connected. So I'm pretty self-aware, which is why I consider myself a hypocrite. I was out here promoting this idea of a whole food plant-based diet and I wasn't fully living that. So in 2012, about a year after the film came out, after Forks Over Knives came out, I enrolled in Dr. T. Colin Campbell's plant-based nutrition course through Cornell University. And I fought my way through that. I argued the case of a high-protein diet. I argued the case for sports supplementation. And then you know what I discovered? This guy, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, had been studying this topic longer than I had been alive. And that's when I had to check my ego at the door and say, because I used to say, honestly, what does he know about being a champion vegan bodybuilder? I put on 100 pounds. I went through the trenches. I put myself through this. I ate the calories. I went to the gym when I didn't want to, when I hated it. But I carried this obligation of being one of the only vegan bodybuilders in the world at the time. I carried that on my shoulders, this responsibility to move the vegan sports movement forward in the early days when there were only a handful of us, like literally a handful of us that I could name around the world doing it in any kind of public way. And I put all that on the shelf. I said, forget it. This guy knows a heck of a lot more than I do. I was winging it. I was just trying to discover it. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I don't have a formal training in plant-based nutrition or anything like. I took some nutrition classes in college and some sports biochemistry and anatomy, physiology, and all of this kind of stuff, biochemistry and everything. And I did really well. I got perfect 4.0 grade point average. But I did the one thing that so many of my colleagues, even to this day, are unwilling to do. And that's put it to the test. And I have not had sports nutrition products, not even a single protein powder drink, since 2012, over a decade. And you know what happened? I got bigger and stronger than I'd ever been in my entire life. That's just my story. Nothing against. I tell people I'm not anti-sports nutrition supplements.
Right.
I'm just pro whole foods. Before this call, blueberries, raspberries, nectarine. What's the other one I just had? Coconut water. Watermelon. But then there's some substance stuff too. I had some tamales. And potatoes and tofu and vegetables and all this kind of stuff. But I'm just pro whole foods. I have great friends who formulate and create sports nutrition products. We've already invoked one of their names, Jeff Palmer. Right. I'm not against that stuff, and I know that can help a lot of people. But I wasn't looking for that at this time in my life. Can you imagine? I've been removed from competitive bodybuilding for over a decade. I'm no longer in my 20s and in my 30s and in this great anabolic position with great testosterone and this ability to build muscle. I'm in my mid 40s now. I've been vegan for almost 3 decades, and I had the heaviest lift of my entire life in a particular exercise, decline barbell bench press, 345 pounds. It's a lot of weight going above your neck and shoulders and chest. Unassisted 345-pound decline barbell bench press within the last month. And well over 300 pounds training just a week ago, same exercise. And, and I'm a guy who hasn't used. I got bigger and stronger than I'd ever been without them. And my only theory, and it's just a theory because I don't know anything in the big picture. I don't know as much as you guys do. I just put things to the test and give them a try and see what happens. My theory is that the nutrient density from the food in its whole state, everything involved in it, the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients, even the water and the fiber, all of it combined gave me a return on investment that perhaps supplements couldn't even do. I don't know. That's just a theory that.
Well, your point is well made in that it is always experiential. No matter how much we all teach, but it comes down to whatever we're sharing in information. If that person puts it into their life and doesn't achieve what we're telling them they can achieve, they're going to toss it. So it ends up becoming more than intellectual, becomes experiential. But that discovery of the profound simplicity of whole food nutrition is such a huge piece. And, that's what drove Colin Campbell to write his book Whole, which is really a revelation about the fact that when we eat these things, there are so many thousands of nutrients that we don't even know are contained in these foods. and their synergies and their interactions. So that was a remarkable discovery and a remarkable position to hold to, because you are pressured from the outside forces looking at all of these supplemental products, and it creates a kind of dependency. And even in athletes, because athletes can be very superstitious, you know that. And so they can become very dependent on what they think is making them be successful. So when you break through that, like you did, that's a really profound step that I'm sure has, in your writing and in your touring and in your teaching, has affected so many people. And I want to go there next. From there, what was the driving force for your purpose to find that voice for writing and touring and teaching the way you have? Because you've truly become a remarkable international ambassador of this message. And that's a real testimony to you and the stick-to-itiveness that you've had through the years. So how did you find that voice and then realize, you know what, I want to write this. I love writing. I want to get this out. And that becomes a whole other dance and a whole other, thing in your life. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Dr. Sabatino, because that's such a profound part of my life. And I honestly believe, just again, objectively reflecting back, I mean, even as I just close my eyes and go back almost 40 years, it was my father. I remember seeing him staying up late writing on a notepad, and his secretary would later type it up, and these would become books. And he toured to 6 continents. I've now toured to 5. It's taken me around the world. I wanted to be, when you look at what do you want to be when you grow up, in 3rd grade, 1988 in Mrs. Young's class, I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote a bunch of books. I still have them. Spiral bound, laminated stories that I wrote in 1988 in 3rd grade at 8 years old. And that's when I decided that's what I want to do. Many people may not know this. I had my own one-on-one writing coach when I was a teenager in high school. I wrote a 100-page children's adventure story. My dad didn't have a lot of extra time or money raising 4 kids who were all involved in sports and music and 4-H. And I mean, I can't imagine how expensive or how difficult that would have been. Found the time to take me on a trip to one of the cities 1,000 miles away where this make-believe story that I wrote took place, so I could have first-person research. I was like 16 years old, And so I had mentors, I had role models, and I wanted to use writing to obviously express my voice. And I used bodybuilding as a vehicle for that. A lot of people don't know this. My first books that I wrote, aside from all those children's books, and I probably wrote 10 of them, including some that were in a series, and maybe someday when life slows down, I'll publish those, and my nieces and nephews are already getting almost too old to appreciate those. Maybe I should have done it sooner. But aside from those children's books, I wrote personal development books, Tony Robbins type books, self-help books, 300-page books called Take Action and Make It Happen, because I was applying that to my life. In my 20s, I was already speaking around the world to some degree. And I produced this documentary, and I was one of the few notable vegan athletes in the world. And I was getting these opportunities to be interviewed by the New York Times, the Seattle Times, speaking on large stages in Toronto and around the world. And it was because of these principles of connecting the dots and believing in oneself and maximizing the 1,440 minutes we have every day, and prioritizing these things and creating consistent streaks and being able to visualize that, I'm this small kid right now, but someday I'm going to be bigger and stronger, and you're going to see me on Muscle magazines, and envision that and manifest that into reality. I understood all that stuff. I was on stage, with David Wolf at the height of his career, and other kind of motivational speakers, and flown out to Hawaii and speaking on stage and pumping up crowds and meeting, connecting with Tony Robbins briefly, and people that I, had seen as kind of role models in that space. But that didn't work for me. Nobody wanted to buy that book. I had an agent, shopped it around. Nobody knew Robert Cheeke as this motivational guy, even if that was the core of my success as a vegan bodybuilder. I had no business winning bodybuilding competitions as a vegan, but I did because of these principles that I followed, that I wanted to share with other people. And so my friend, Brendan Brazier, who was in my documentary in 2005, and a friend, and who got me a job for a decade with Vega, and who was a mentor and who is a mentor. I still see him about once a year. I was actually at his house when I got my final rejection letter. I mean, 20, 30 publishers all rejected me. Everybody rejected me. And I was at his house when the email came in on probably some old BlackBerry phone or some other, early stage smartphone maybe that I could check email on. And it was a rejection letter from his publisher. And if you know Brendan Brazier, you may or may not, but he's one of the great pioneering plant-based athletes in the history of the movement. But he's very soft-spoken. He's very quiet. He appears to be very introverted. And he just rotated his chair towards me, looked at me and said, "Robert, the reason they're turning you down is because nobody knows you as a motivational speaker. You're a champion vegan bodybuilder. You need to write about that." And I said, "I don't want to write about that. It's too hard. It's too much work to talk about the nuances of plant-based nutrition and how many grams of this and how many ounces of this and how many calories for this and the nuances of the exercise physiology. It just seemed too daunting." He said, "That's your only way. That's what people know you as. And then you've built a name and reputation. Like, that's what would sell." So I sat down and I did it, but I only did it, at least in a successful way, because of a guy I met on a random tour of a natural medicine school in Portland, Oregon. Dr. David Schleich was giving me a tour, really trying to recruit me to enroll and be a student in the naturopathic medicine school. And I said, "Oh no, I'm going to be a writer," And he's like, "How's that going?" I said, "Well, I've been working at it for years." He's like, "How many books do you have done?" And I said, "Well, none, but I'm working at it." And again, same kind of thing like Brendan. He looked at me, he said, "Robert, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home." And this changed my life forever. This right here, I'm going to share with you, changed my life forever. He said, "Robert, what I want you to do is go home and I want you to write 2 pages every day. I don't care if it's good. I don't care if it's bad. You write 2 pages every day and soon you've written a book." That was Dr. David Schleich. I've met him once my entire life, but I've thanked him in acknowledgments of books, since. Because I went home and I didn't just write 2 pages a day. Some days I wrote 20 pages. I got in that flow state. I know you've been in it when you wrote your PhD, when you wrote your thesis. You told me about that. Just pumping out hundreds of pages in a short amount of time. I got in the zone one time on a flight to Hawaii. I wrote 30 pages. I couldn't stop. I never took the pen off paper for an 8-hour flight. A few months later, I had a book, Vegan Bodybuilding and Fitness. I self-published it, and it did so well, outselling all these other vegan books. It got acquired by a publisher within a matter of months. Mm-hmm. Went on to sell more than 20,000 copies, and reached a lot of people and opened the door for me and for others to do some great things. And I continued to scratch that itch and pursue that. Writing became my new passion. I was newly retired from bodybuilding, and I pumped out all those books you mentioned by following David Schleich's advice that if you write, for me, it was 2 pages. That's just what he told me. But really, it could be anything. It could be 2 paragraphs. It could be 1 page. It's whatever it is for you. All he is saying is be consistent. Show up every day. Show up every day and give this effort. It could be running. It could be reading. It could be writing. It could be gardening. It could be exercise. It could be whatever it is. Just show up every day. And that's what I did. And I've pumped out. Now I just finished my 6th book. It goes off. It's in its 3rd round of editing. It goes off to print in November, and then it comes out in June of 2024.
Beautiful.
But I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be there if those people didn't have those conversations with me and say, "Robert, this is what the audience is looking for, or this is what your skill set is." I talked about my self-awareness before, but my self-awareness is in a different place now in my 40s than it was in my 20s. I thought I could just outwork everybody. I just said, not on my watch. No one's going to outwork me. Right. It's just not possible. I was one of those guys. Whatever DNA I got from whichever parent, I don't know where it comes from. I've had this just insatiable drive to be successful. And this is a longer conversation, Dr. Sabatino, but one I'd love to have with you sometime. But just briefly, part of that is actually, honestly, the psychology behind it is partly being a middle child and trying to impress my parents, and trying to impress my schoolmates who thought I was, probably not going to amount to much. And that's all superficial BS, but it's also deep rooted in my psychology that says, Robert, you have to be significant or else you're going to be nothing. You've got to stand out or else you're going to be normal. You're going to be average. You're going to be insignificant. And I carried that with me. I'm only just now at age 43 and a half having these deeply meaningful conversations with some of the most important people in my life, my best friends, my wife, mentors, that I'm learning to let go of some of that expectation of, for example, Dr. Sabatino, I knew I was going to become a New York Times bestseller, but I worried what would happen to me if I didn't. Not that I was going to harm myself in any kind of dangerous way, but the psychological damage that was going to be projected onto me by myself if I didn't make it. By the way, make something that only like 0.000 something % of people ever make. But I set the expectation so high that if I didn't make it, I was just going to be crumbled in a pile of depression, and who knows where I would have gone.
Which is an interesting idea when you consider the success you had before that book that became a bestseller. But it's kind of interesting because and I think this is a great lesson because it's such a Western mindset too. And look, I've got it too. You made a good point. The highest performing athletes are the people that outwork everybody. We know that. That old line that it's 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. There's a lot of truth to that mentality. But the bottom line is I think as you evolve, the end game is not nearly as important as the process over time, because that's more of an Eastern concept, the art of doing, not what you actually achieve. The achievement can come by the ongoing doing, but this idea, we have that American mindset that if you don't achieve a certain level, you're a failure. And then there's a depression, and then there's an anxiety about that. So I think in your own dance, as much as you've achieved, you're kind of finding that middle ground of like, yeah, okay, I got to lighten up a little bit on that because I'm still who I am. The core of who I am is not about what I achieve. It's about the divine nature, the sacred nature of who I am as a person. And I think coming back to that is a hard lesson, but I think you've done that through this process of achievement and doing. So it's kind of interesting to hear your dance. Because I understand that. Any high achieving person, if they don't achieve that goal, they can really go into a state of depression and breakdown. And we have this idea that we're supposed to have certain levels of achievement and then we even time it. I've got people in my own family, my sons, they're at a certain age where they feel like if they didn't do something by a certain age, there's something wrong with them. And part of that learning has been, no, there's nothing wrong. There's just a process to that. And you have to stay the course. And if you stay the course and you come from purpose and you come from doing and you come from sitting there and doing and writing every day, and you have a vision of what you're trying to achieve, you probably will achieve it. Robert, let me ask you a question. For the people out here, what's the URL? What's the location they can go to follow you, to find out more about the incredible things that you're doing? What's that website you want people to know?
Yeah, veganbodybuilding.com. I actually founded that over 20 years ago, believe it or not, I'm the least tech savvy person you probably know. But yeah, that's my website, and that's where people can find me and kind of my story and links to my books
well, that's also part of your heart, because not only did you find that, you founded the vegan bodybuilding and fitness kind of organization that was a big part of kind of a legacy for people that you wanted to turn on to understanding how they can be these high performance plant-based athletes. So talk a little bit about that kind of giving back for you, what it really means to you to be connected to that.
It's really funny, just funny timing, synchronistic timing. You mentioned that because 5 minutes before we hopped on this call, I got an audio message from Corinne Sutton. He's a 23-time champion vegan bodybuilder on a professional level. He lives right out there in Florida. You probably know him. He's been out there to Balance for Life. He's right out there in Miami. And he just left me a message just reaching out and said, hey man, if it wasn't for you and your vegan bodybuilding book that came out 13 years ago, I don't know that I would be doing this. I don't know that I would have found veganism. I don't know that I would have found bodybuilding. And he's one of the greatest vegan bodybuilders in the history of the world. I'm honored to call him a friend. I tour with him. I've toured with him now for 6 years or so. He's in incredible shape. I mean, he was the head judge at Jeff Palmer's event. You would have seen him there up on stage.
I did see him. Yes.
Yeah. Big muscular guy,
Right.
but also very compassionate, big heart. And he told me it was that vegan bodybuilding book and my Facebook group, which at the time, I don't have it anymore, but I had a group that had 30 or 40,000 members, and it just became overwhelming and to continue to manage. So I ended up actually closing it. But those communities, and you talk about, I don't think much about legacy. I don't think much about some of this kind of stuff, but there are more people than I could even probably count off the top of my head who have met their life partner, their wife, their husband, their spouse, their business partner through my vegan bodybuilding and fitness communities, through my website, through the retreats that I used to host 20 years ago or 18 years ago, through my Facebook groups that had members by the tens of thousands. And my friend Corinne just happened to mention those two things today, that my book, and also great vegan bodybuilder Will Tucker. He's multi-time champion vegan bodybuilder. He's retired now in his early 50s. He stumbled upon my book in Borders when that was still a bookstore, and that changed his trajectory, and so many others, including some of these Olympic type athletes and world-class athletes that I was so honored to be able to interview for The Plant-Based Athlete, which was the book that became the bestseller. It's in 8 languages worldwide, and it's been really rewarding. And I have to go back to your comment real quick. I can't let it go. That I'm totally on board with you, that it's the journey, not the destination. I have been so much connected to Eastern philosophy ever since my trip to Southeast Asia 7 years ago, and even really before that, leading up to that trip. And that's really changed my perspectives. And I'm so grateful for the journey, which is so much more fulfilling than, I mean, even making a bestseller list, it's there and it's permanent. It's on your resume or your CV or after your name for the rest of your life, but it goes away after a week. You call your parents, you call your best friends. I did it. I told you. I know it took 33 years, but I did it, but that goes away, but the journey doesn't. The memories from, my new book, The Impactful Vegan, through those hundreds of consecutive days of writing at least 2 pages. It didn't matter if it was 2 a.m. and I was on tour in New York City, having visited 4 or 5 bookstores in Manhattan and just got back to the place that I was staying in Ocean City, New Jersey, and had to go to bed, but I hadn't written my 2 pages yet. So I had to stay awake and do it, because I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't do it the next day or the next day or the next day, because that's just how my psychology works. And that's what I needed to do. It reminds me of, I have to give some credit if time is allowed here.
Of course.
The reason why I walked away from an addiction to caffeine is because of you and my time I spent at Balance for Life. It completely dominated my life. Just talking about consistency and streaks and this kind of stuff, and how I was so good with writing. My life was dominated by an addiction to hundreds of milligrams of caffeine a day. It affected my sleep. I went to bed dreaming of, I couldn't wait to open up a glass bottle and have it the next day. It ended up being a $10 a day addiction, which may not seem like a lot, but for me at the time of my life, it was hundreds of dollars a month. It drove my wife crazy, and I couldn't go a day without it. And I would get headaches and think, oh, I'm a speaker, I'm a performer, I'm a high achiever. I can't be in a position where I have headaches. And so I would justify this behavior of this addiction. I've been lifetime drug and alcohol free, and I didn't recognize that this substance, caffeine, is perhaps the most used drug in the entire world. Tea and coffee being the 2 most commonly consumed beverages worldwide, especially in Asian cultures, and then obviously all throughout the West, with particularly coffee. And I was right in the middle of it, where I couldn't function without it. And then I came out to Deerfield Beach, Florida. I spent 5 or 6 days with you, and I said, man, I got to kick this thing, because it controls me. I don't control it. And that was, I believe, around November of 2018. And I've been caffeine free ever since. And that changed my life, because not that I'm, and a totally all or nothing person, which sometimes my wife puts me in that category, because in some ways I probably am. But I'm trying to explain the justification for why I would still be writing at 2 a.m, because I needed to do it, because if I didn't, I knew it would give me permission to take my foot off the gas, and then I would fall behind in connecting the dots and what my real dreams and goals were in this limited time that we have here on Earth to experience life. And I needed to do things like break free of caffeine addiction, which I couldn't do without help. And you just happened to be the guy that helped me with that. And I mentioned I mentioned you on the phone with Tim Kaufman today, and in a podcast interview with Tim Kaufman recently. And I mention it often, actually, how you played that role in my life when I needed it. And I just learned this expression, and sorry for this continued rambling, but I just learned this expression a few days ago. I'm surprised I didn't know earlier that people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And, you came into my life for a reason at that time, and maybe for a season, who knows, maybe for a lifetime. We've been connected now for quite a few years, but now I'm able to objectively look back and be even more self-aware, even from as much of an Eastern philosophy meditation perspective as I can, and recognize the gifts of the people who came into my life. And it's happening right now, Dr. Sabatino. I'm going through some stuff right now, some difficult stuff, some challenges with friction between me and some of my best friends, longtime friends of 15 years. And it's difficult. It's difficult. And one of my friends just said this expression the other day, not to me, not about me, just on his own, just on his own video he made on an Instagram page. But it resonated with me. He talked about the fact that we think all these people are changing around us. And he said, no, they're not changing. You are. Right. You're the one changing. And that made me reflect on that. Maybe I'm the one changing. I'm the one that's setting different boundaries. I'm the one that's setting different expectations. I'm the one that's taking on new projects, and I'm focusing more on being present and mindfulness and meditation and family and work-life balance. And I was never that guy before. I was pedal to the metal, man. I couldn't stop. And it was starting to consume me. In fact, I hope I don't regret saying this. I've already kind of detached, just recently in the last few weeks, detached expectations. Because for the last 2 years, I was obsessed with, I'm going to make a return, repeat, back on the New York Times bestseller list, New York Times bestseller list or bust. I'm going to do this or else. I don't know what's going to happen to me if I don't. All these stories I told myself. And I've been listening to some podcasts lately. I've been listening to conversations, been listening to philosophers, been listening to meditation teachers. I've been practicing some meditation, even with a monk of 38 years from Sri Lanka, who I just was grateful to be in his presence and practice a few hours meditation with him at this animal and vegan advocacy conference in Los Angeles recently. And I just said, you know what? I'm starting to detach myself from these expectations that cause me stress and anxiety. And on a one-on-one level that I've dealt with anxiety now for about 8 years, perhaps from being a high performer, or at least thinking that I am. But I can tell you, I've been feeling pretty good recently. The things that I used to have to, if you want to say medicate, and it's not medicine, but I've had to use things like even this, lotion on my hands because my skin crawls with this anxiety. It's a coping device. I have to use this lotion, probably applying it somewhere around 40 or 50 times per day, like 50 times per day. I didn't use it for a whole week. That would have sent me into a complete panic attack and curling up in a ball and hiding out, just weeks or months ago. But I'm really trying to grow here. And people like you and many other mentors who've come into my life for a reason or for a season or for a lifetime have shown me that I can be comfortable in my own skin and be okay with, I don't have to prove these things to my parents to earn their love, or my classmates to show them from. I don't need to do that anymore. You know, I can be okay with me. And it just so happens that my diet, lifestyle, outlook has put me in arguably the best shape of my life in my mid 40s as a retired bodybuilder, 3 decades into veganism, because I'm in a place of a place of happiness and peace. And I'm grateful for it.
Well, Robert, I got to tell you, I really appreciate that part of this message and this conversation, because the truth is we're all here to help each other. And I know in my own dance, I've had my own addictions, my own dependencies, and you find a way to come back to that divine part of who we really are, across from all the ego connection and all the ego definitions that we have and all the accomplishments that we think are the things that truly define us. And not that they're not important, but they create their own set of dependencies. So that whole idea of being able to let go and to really allow yourself to enjoy the process, to come back to the power that operates within each of us, so that we're not surrendering our autonomy to these dependencies. That is an unbelievable revelation. And I give you a lot of credit for being open to taking that journey, because it's not an easy journey. If you think about the fact how profound addiction and compulsive behavior is on our planet, you realize how many people are in the throes of dependency. And
Yeah.
when you really break free from that, and this is one of the beautiful things, in my opinion, about a lifestyle that is centered around compassion, empathy, and love, including self-love, which is what this plant exclusive lifestyle is about. It provides that vehicle to have the very insight and the very sense of self-worth and self-love that you just expressed. So I really appreciate that. And I think that's a remarkable inspiration. And I think that's probably what's led you into now this kind of a book, The Impactful Vegan, that whole model of the philosophical stuff that you really wanted to kind of inspire people with at the very beginning, but you've evolved to a place where you really can be the voice for that because of your own personal journey. And I really tout you and honor you for that. So as we wind this down, do you have any final words you'd like to share with the people out here?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of love and appreciation for you. I've been fortunate to spend multiple weekends or weeks out there in Deerfield Beach, Florida, at Balance for Life, and seen you around elsewhere and other conferences and all of that. And so I just have a lot of gratitude for you, Dr. Sabatino, I want to share. And also, I don't know if I should share this. I just thought of this the other day, but it's on this topic. It's poetic. It's beautiful if I do mention it. And who knows if I'm going to pursue it or not anyway, so I don't care at this point. But I thought of a new book title, maybe for my next book. You know what I thought of, Dr. Sabatino, and I emailed myself when I thought of it in the moment as I'm reflecting on all this meditative and Eastern philosophy and inward reflection and all this, especially as someone who's been a go-getter his entire life and a high achiever. Here's my new book title, potentially. Don't go big, go home. And I get emotional saying it, because for so many years I was chasing something. I was chasing significance. I was chasing fame. I was chasing money. I was chasing love. I was chasing appreciation. I don't want to go big anymore. I want to go home. And that's just metaphorically. That's home is wherever your inner peace is. Doesn't mean I need to go home to Oregon to the farm. It means I need to go home and be okay with me, because I wasn't always okay with me. I wasn't always kind. I may have been vegan. I wasn't always compassionate to me.
Well,
and now,
listen, yeah, go ahead.
And now that's what I think of. Don't go big, go home. And in this especially American hustle culture, so many of us keep trying to make it big, and it may not be in the cards for us. We may not have what it takes, and maybe we can be at ease if we just go home instead. And it doesn't mean, don't strive for great things. It just means self-awareness and where you find your peace. So that's all. I just thought that was a fitting way to finish our conversation.
No question. My special guest today was Robert Cheeke. I want to really thank you, Robert. You are always an inspiration. You're always a motivation. You're affecting so many people in a beautiful way across the world. And I'm glad you have the love that you do in your life and the things that are going on. I always wish you the greatest success with everything that you do because you truly deserve it. And I urge our audience out there to go to veganbodybuilding.com, follow Robert, touch into his books and the things that he's doing. He has a lot to offer, and I urge you to participate and benefit from his offerings. And I truly want to thank the audience that's out there that joined us today, because without you, we couldn't do what we do. I couldn't do what we do. And I want to really thank you for being part of this really active, healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I want to thank you for joining the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.